Alright, you've almost made it. We're on to our very final lecture of this series on ESL Writing Essentials. Congratulations for making it this far. Today we're going to take on maybe the lecture you've all been waiting for, the most common ESL writing mistakes. So I've compiled this list of the 3 most common mistakes I see in non-native English writers after working with hundreds and hundreds of students from around the world. The first are problems with articles when we're dealing with count and non-count nouns. The second is the idea of dangling modifiers. And finally, the third is problems with possessives. So let's start with the articles. The first rule to remember is never use an indefinite article, so remember that is a or an, with non-count nouns. So incorrect. She took a deep breath of an air. Air, of course, is a non-count noun. You can't count how many airs you're breathing. So the correct form would be she took a deep breath of air. The other rule to remember, don't use articles with non-count or plural count nouns when stating a general application. Here's an incorrect example. The money is not happiness. Let's see if you can correct that on your own. Remember the rule, don't use articles when stating a general application. Good, so we simply get rid of the and we have money is not happiness. Here's another incorrect example, another practice. The university professors often emphasize research over teaching. So here we have a plural noun, university professors. What do we need to do to fix that sentence? Exactly the same thing as the first set of examples. We get rid of the, we get rid of that article. Here the sentence is stating a general application. So, university professors often emphasize research over teaching. The next is our dangling modifiers. A dangling modifier is when a modifier is not directly connected to the word or words it is intended to modify. Remember when we talked specifically about modifiers, we talked about the idea of proximity. Well, one area I see the most problem with is when students or writers use introductory clauses. Often what happens in introductory clauses is that you try to imply a subject rather than stating one. Here, for example, when just a boy, my mother returned to school. This sounds almost like your mother was once a boy, which is of course problematic. So we have a correct example instead. When I was just a boy, my mother returned to school. So it's a dangling modifier if we have that prepositional phrase as an introductory clause without stating a subject. So remember, when using a modifier, you must always make sure it is clear to your reader what word you are modifying. And look back at our modifier section for ideas on how to do that. Now on to our final common mistake that needs to be corrected. That is possessives. Possessives, of course, are nouns and indefinite pronouns that show ownership or possession. Indefinite pronouns are everybody, anyone, not pronouns like you, I, he. These rules that we're about to discuss do not work for definite pronouns, rather indefinite pronouns, like everybody and anyone. Possessives are always shown by an apostrophe. However, depending on what type of noun or pronoun you are using, the apostrophe may go in a different place. So for singular nouns and indefinite pronouns, you add an apostrophe and an S after the last letter of the word, even if that word ends in S. So we have a few examples here. The dog's fur, Mr. Harris's house, anybody's coat, and yesterday's class. For plural nouns that do not end in S, we do the same thing. We add an apostrophe S after the last letter of the word. The children's toys, the 3 women's shoes, the geese's wings. For plural nouns that do end in S, however, this is where it changes. Instead of adding an extra S, we just add the apostrophe. So we have here the players' uniforms, the Obama's dog, my parents' house. Each of those plural nouns ended in S, so we simply add an apostrophe at the very end of the word. There are a couple more tricky categories of possessives. The first is compound nouns. So compound nouns are, of course, nouns that are made up of more than one noun. For those, we add an apostrophe and an S after the last word. My brother-in-law's new car. the Prime Minister's security guard. So you notice the apostrophe S gets placed at the very end of the last word of a compound noun. When you have two or more nouns, it also gets tricky. If they're showing joint possession, you add an apostrophe S after the last name, kind of like a compound noun. Big Bird and Elmo's television program. So because they both possess the television program, they're showing joint possession, then we put the apostrophe S after Elmo, after the last name. If we're naming two or more nouns that own things separately, then we put an apostrophe S after each of the names, or each of the objects. So Michael's and John's ideas are both unique but interesting. In this sentence, it is clear that their ideas are not the same, so they are not owning the ideas jointly. Rather, they both have separate ideas, so we put the apostrophe S after each one of the names. And that's it, guys. These are really the three most common mistakes I see in non-native English writing. And if you can conquer these, added to your already eloquent writing, I'm sure, you're going to begin to write like a native English speaker. But again, if you're still having issues with these or any other topics from the course, or topics outside of the course that I didn't cover, please let me know. I'd love to help you out.